You are listening to Bound by Death's Sorcerer, written by Akumah and voiceover by Sara. Akumah Audiobooks. Chapter 27, The Unexpected Guest. We have a lot to talk about. Tyler found Emily back in the overstocked kitchen. Morning light streamed in through the windows, though the blinds were still drawn, only letting in a good amount of ambient light while completely blocking them from seeing anything outside. His sister was sitting at a small, rickety wooden table, almost finished eating what appeared to have been a fried egg and toast. Ordinarily, Tyler would have envied the luxury, but at the moment, that kind of thought was far from his mind. Remaining only halfway into the room, Tyler leaned against the doorway and suppressed a sigh. Yes, I suppose we do. Putting down her fork, Emily wiped her mouth with a pristine white napkin. She eyed Tyler impassively. Come all the way in. I'm gonna feel weird talking to you if you just hang around in the doorway like that. Sighing for real this time, Tyler lurched back to his feet and took a seat across from her. He steepled his fingers as if he were preparing for a professional interview and made his best effort to maintain eye contact. It was strange, he had felt distant from his adoptive sister at times in the past, but he had never felt so uncomfortable. There's so much I could say, she began, and I'm sure you have plenty of questions of your own. Tyler nodded slowly at that. Nika said we should have at least a few hours though, so, she trailed off. I guess we can just talk it out as it comes. Tyler studied her plate. Now that he saw it up close, he realized she hadn't actually eaten most of it. The egg was spread around and the toast was torn up, giving the appearance of a meal, but he suspected she had only taken a few bites. I'll go first then, he muttered. Emily tilted her head. I mean, I'll fill you in on what happened, not ask my questions first. Emily nodded slowly herself, and Tyler proceeded. First, he explained the heist with Lord Harold. Their objective, their plan, and how it ended up going wrong despite the initial success. When Tyler got to the part where he bonded with the book, he decided to conjure it to show her. Emily arched an eyebrow. So you have a receptor now? Yes. Tyler passed it to her, and she ran her hand over the intricately engraved, dark yet prismatic cover. It's beautiful, she finally said, flipping open to the first, blank, page. I've never seen one like this. She frowned, flipping through more blank pages. What is it? Which class? Tyler licked his lips. He didn't even consider lying to Emily. She was his sister, and even though she had hidden some big stuff from him, he still trusted her. But he had kept it secret from her initially, he realized at the same time. He still didn't understand why he had done so. They had both kept secrets from each other. Now would be as good a time as any to rebuild their mutual support. But that didn't make explaining it any easier. While Tyler was determined to tell her, it was still difficult for him to form the words. Tome of the Necromantic Artificer, he finally said. No softening it up, no beating around the issue. It was what it was. Looking back up to meet his gaze, Emily carefully passed the book back, treating it with ginger respect despite its indestructibility. Tyler frowned slightly. Was it just reverence for a powerful item, or was it a kind of fear? Perhaps he was reading too much into her reactions. I've never heard of that class, she said with a frown of her own. So are you a necromancer now? How does the artificer part work? Taking the book and then dismissing it, Tyler shrugged. I'm not technically a necromancer. I have a crafting class based on necromancy. That mace I had and my cloak are both items I made from dungeon monsters. Speaking of which, where was his cloak? With an idle flex of his soul, Tyler returned it to his inventory. That was turning out to be pretty convenient, it seemed that he would never have to worry about losing his items. Anyway, when I kill something, I can take its soul. That's how I enchant the items I make. Emily nodded slowly. Tyler had been worried about how she would react to the revelation, but she didn't seem distraught or alarmed. She just appeared thoughtful. What about all of the arcane energy? She asked after a moment. By what Kenny said, you had a ton. She tilted her head. I didn't think you had any growth technique, since you never studied magic. She paused. Does the class give you one? Tyler was vaguely aware that arcane energy could be raised through various different techniques, some of which were common and available to any mage, and some of which were rare or esoteric. He hadn't had to worry about any of that, of course. I get it from devouring souls, he deadpanned. Emily blinked, a bit of true surprise breaking through her expression for the first time during the conversation. Huh. Well, that's certainly a thing, I guess. Tyler shrugged, and then readjusted his towel to prevent it from slipping away.
Yeah.
I'll explain more as we get to it. With that, he resumed his recounting of the events of the previous few days. Emily nodded to herself in some kind of understanding as he explained his encounter with Deva and how she saved him. He then largely skipped over his day at the Imperial Academy and began explaining what he saw in Lord Harold's mansion. Holy fudge, Emily interrupted him as he explained how he hid in the cabinet. She seemed quite shaken by his observations of Lord Harley. Tyler couldn't blame her, of course. It couldn't be pleasant to hear when their younger siblings were held captive. From there, Tyler briefly explained how he returned to the apartment and defeated the mercenary, though he mostly glossed over the latter part. When he recounted his final encounter with Deva, Emily snorted in amusement and rolled her eyes. If you think I'm pissed with you right now, you have no idea what you would have had coming from me if you had turned yourself in. Tyler arched an eyebrow. I think I would have been rather preoccupied with Lord Harley. But Emily shook her head. Nope. I would have made that psycho look like a schoolyard bully. Rolling his own eyes, Tyler explained the events of the dungeon delve. He didn't go into much detail here either, at least until the point where he met Kenny. He even began to summarize some of the conversations they had, but Emily interrupted him. Yes, I've met him, she admonished, and he's still here, last I checked. With that, Tyler leaned back. And there you have it. The only thing he didn't mention were his conversations with the books and the bizarre experience he had after his battle of wills with the dungeon. He would tell her the former eventually, but for now it just seemed like it would be a distraction, and the latter wasn't particularly relevant. Now it was Emily's turn. How did you avoid capture? Tyler asked. Did you also have to run from the apartment? Emily shook her head. No. I knew to hide before I even left the academy. Tyler raised an inquisitive eyebrow, and she continued. A professor, not anyone I know, told me that Lord Harold was dead and that I needed to lie low. I was kind of spooked at first, because I didn't know the man. I think he knew I was suspicious because he mentioned your name and said that you had just completed a job with Lord Harold. Wait. Tyler held up a hand. So one of the professors knew I had a job with him? His mind began turning. As far as Tyler was aware, despite Lord Harold's significant influence, the crime boss had never truly infiltrated the Imperial Academy. Exerted influence, yes, but not control. Unless Tyler was mistaken, which he had to admit was a possibility, as he was only a minor accomplice until recently, this meant that people outside of Lord Harold's circle knew of the heist. That was alarming, but no longer unexpected. What threw things off in Tyler's mind was that the unknown professor had helped Emily. That suggests that there are third parties which oppose Lord Harley and his board, Tyler murmured. Emily had stopped speaking, and she now stared at him. You're going to have to explain what you're talking about, she finally said. Tyler blinked. Sorry, I got lost in my own thoughts. He paused. I'll explain what I was thinking in a bit, just remind me. He then gestured in a circular motion with one hand. Carry on. Emily tilted her head but did as he asked. Anyway, I still didn't trust him, but I knew that something was up. So I took a long, roundabout way back to the apartment. I was almost there when I was intercepted by this posh red-haired young woman. Deva, Tyler supplied, and Emily blinked. Tyler realized he had never described her appearance. So that's who that was, Emily surmised. Well, she stopped me, which was admittedly quite concerning, and she told me that I couldn't continue or they would capture me. She paused. I think this was after you ran away? Tyler shrugged. Possibly. What did you do? Emily began to laugh, and then went oddly blank. I ran past her and she chased me. But I got there first, which is when I realized I never would have made it if she truly needed to stop me. Tyler inclined his head, and she continued with a sigh. Anyway, I'm glad that she followed, because there were 4 armed guards there. I wouldn't have been able to take them. But Deva did. It wasn't a question, but Emily answered anyway. She tore them limb from limb, and then asked me to leave, because, and I quote, I lose my appetite when other people are watching. Tyler just stared. Okay. Anyway, Emily continued, she also told me that you went into the dungeon, so.
Yeah.
I guess this was after you got away. Right. That confirmed it. So I followed you into the dungeon. Emily glared now. It was fudging horrible. I could manage the first 2 areas. I had to go back to the academy first to get supplies, mind you, but then that area where I met up with you and Kenny? She shuddered. That was horrible. Half the shit was dead, so my magic was useless, and the other half just ate up anything I threw at it. Tyler nodded slowly. Right. Flesh crafter. He needed to ask about that. So, he shifted awkwardly. What's the deal with the flesh crafting? It sounds like you don't have a receptor? Emily sighed and flicked her eyes back down to her plate. Well. It started when I needed extra money after I broke my fountain pen. Returning her gaze to meet Tyler's, she continued. So I took up extra work for one of my copywriting clients, Nika. Sighing again, Emily flicked back a strand of blonde hair that had been dangling in her eyes for some time. She paid quite well, so I decided to take up more additional work from her. Anyway, one thing led to another, and she offered to teach me as payment instead. Emily leaned back as well, slumping slightly in her chair. It seemed like a far better proposition than my general arcane studies, so I continued. Tyler frowned. But why did you never tell me? That's what I don't understand. Emily licked her lips. It sounds silly now, but I was embarrassed about the pen, and I knew you wouldn't want me taking additional work. And then I knew you would worry about my studies, and then by the time I was her apprentice I kept meaning to tell you but kept chickening out. Leaning forward, Tyler shook his head, fixing Emily with a disapproving gaze. He understood it now, but that didn't mean he was happy with it. I'm not angry, he began, not even really disappointed. He sighed. I just hope you'll tell me things like this in the future. Emily nodded, seemingly about to speak, and then a sharp knock at the front door echoed down the hallway 3 times. They shared a glance. A moment later, 3 more knocks came, and Nika emerged from the basement stairs. The scientist shot a sharp glare at the 2 siblings. Keep your heads down and out of trouble, she loudly whispered, but run if you have to. A moment later, the door opened. Sharing another glance, Tyler and Emily both silently stood. Tyler dropped his towel. There was no point in shame right now, and he didn't want to worry about mobility. She has a pantry with a large window out to the garden, Emily whispered as she led Tyler deeper into the kitchen. Sneaking inside, Tyler closed the door behind them. The window was fairly high up, but there was a shelf next to it, and it was certainly wide enough to easily fit through. The two siblings huddled at the back underneath it. "You first," Tyler whispered. At the same time, he summoned his cat cloak. It only covered his upper body, at least in the front, but perhaps it would grant a little extra stealth. Emily was halfway up the cabinet when the door opened. Tyler whirled around. "Good morning, Miss Emily." Mr. Tyler, the clean-shaven, kinky-haired man, greeted them. His Imperial Academy robes were perfectly cut and freshly ironed. "I hope that I haven't intruded." Emily slipped back down the cabinet and Tyler hastily, and vainly, attempted to cover himself. "My name is Professor Jacob," the man continued, "and while I have had the pleasure of making Miss Emily's acquaintance, I believe it is our first time meeting, Tyler." Tyler barely managed a nod. "I'll get right to business," Professor Jacob said, continuing to ignore the embarrassment of the situation. "I'm here to, shall we say, suggest a career change."
Akumah Audiobooks.